This exercise is one of my favourites from the beginner mat work program from the modified Pilates system. It's called the hip twist. This is the level 1, and it introduces the concept of rotational or rotary stability to the pelvic girdle and the core muscles of the low back. So it's a really revealing exercise, and it can be very, very challenging for any level. So without further ado, let's get into the particulars of this exercise. You'll need a mat, somewhere comfortable to lie, maybe a head cushion if you need one, and if you haven't had a look at the basic components of the rest position, take a peek at my other video just to make sure you're happy with core muscle activation, neutral lumbar-pelvic alignment, and the other aspects which should underpin any of your mat work repertoire. So we're down in our rest position. I've moved myself at this angle towards the camera so you can get a better view of what's going on with the legs when we get into that section. The video I've prepared on the rest position just goes into all the things you should be aware of in terms of comfort and core muscle activation and a neutral lumbar-pelvic position before you start this kind of exercise. So again, if you haven't seen that or you're not familiar with those aspects, take a look at that video before you begin your hip twist. Now, as I mentioned in the introduction, this exercise is challenging or seeking to challenge your rotational stability in that lumbar-pelvic hip complex and therefore the low back as well. So to start with, I would lay your hands over the front of your belt line so you can feel the bony prominences of your pelvis underneath your hands. This will give you very nice tactile feedback as to whether your pelvis is staying in that neutral position in the rotary plane. The basic hip twist, level 1, takes one knee out to the side so the foot pivots onto its outer border and then comes back to center, and then the exercise is repeated on the opposite leg. Now when you're performing your hip twist, it's just the gesture leg that should be moving. The remaining leg stays beautifully still, as does the pelvis and low back. Now that is actually a fair bit harder than it looks. And what you'll probably notice when you're starting off on this exercise is that if your leg moves too far, the weight of it will overcome those rotational stabilizers, and the opposite side of your pelvis and the back will lift and roll, and you'll get that rotation happening, which we're seeking to stop. So the first thing is only move your gesture leg as far as you can without that pelvic roll happening. And that's where the opposite hand resting on that pelvic girdle really helps give you that feedback as to whether that's being maintained. The other thing you should think about is what's happening in that back pocket area. On the rear of the pelvis, if you feel that lift or gap from your mat, again, you know that the weight of the leg has just overcome your ability to hold that still. Now sometimes your body's going to be a bit sneaky, and what it will do on occasion is, instead of allowing the pelvis to lift, the gesture leg moves and the opposite leg gets swung out as a counterbalance. And then you get this almost false reading, don't you, as to how far you can move, but it's actually being offset by the weight of the other leg. So the beauty of this exercise is, it doesn't matter whether you're moving that target, that gesture leg an inch, or whether you're moving it to your full available hip range of movement. If you can do so with the other leg, your pelvis and your back remaining still and pain-free, you'll be using your core muscles really whether you realize it or not. And even if you're very experienced in Pilates, you'll feel when you get to that end level, it becomes quite a struggle to hold with your rotational stabilizers the weight of that leg. The final piece of the puzzle is the breathing. It follows that typical pattern of mat work Pilates where the more difficult movement, the movement away from the body, is performed as you breathe out, and then breathe in when you return. And you just continue that exhalation, inhalation pattern. As with all other exercises in Pilates, we're looking for a quality of movement. So try and avoid that kind of ratchet, jumpy type movement with your leg. Imagine you're moving that leg through treacle, so it's a beautifully smooth movement, and then on the return, it's matched. So there's our basic hip twist level 1. I'll talk through some modifications in just a moment, so you've got some other things to progress onto when this becomes attainable for about 30 to 60 seconds of exercise. Okay, on to some of the modifications which we might be able to use for that level 1 hip twist. I've raided some of my toolkit behind me and kind of gone all squishy on this one. I think the first thing which I'll demonstrate is the use of a small softball. So if I just place the other ones out of the way, and a really nice feature you can do with this is once you're down in that rest position, you can place your softball underneath 1 foot. Now, this will challenge you in a couple of ways once you've got the thing centered underneath your foot. As you perform your hip twist, you've obviously got instability underneath that moving leg, and if you're not careful, it will just roll off the side. So you immediately get the sense that you're having to work that fraction harder to prevent that ball slipping. It works just as well when you're moving the other leg, because as that opposite leg is now moving, the connection with the floor is kind of in that interrupted state, that dynamic state, and so you just have to work harder through those stabilizing muscles as you perform that opposite leg movement. So it actually works quite well to have this underneath one leg, do a handful of repetitions, and then you can switch over to the other side. So the softball is a really nice addition to bring in that base level of extra instability, which gets those muscles working to that higher degree. The other nice thing is to find something which you can perch on one knee. Now this is kind of famous last words, but you want something which is able just to nestle around the knee and stay affixed, but not so impossible that you can't even balance it on there. And then you would do sets of repetition on one side. So once you've got that item, whatever it is, a scrunched up ball of paper, a soft ball, a weighted ball, something like that, once you're happy that you've got it relatively balanced, you can then perform repetitions on the opposite side. Now this gives you very real-time feedback as to whether you're actually keeping that opposite leg still, or whether the poor quality of movement from that other side rolls that ball off. So for those of you who maybe find it difficult to be aware of whether that other leg or that opposite side pelvis is actually staying still, and that feedback mechanism in your body isn't quite as developed as it ought to be, having something physically on there which will fall off the moment you let that leg wobble too much is a really invaluable tool in just introducing that aspect of awareness which can sometimes be missing. If we're going on to much more difficult variations, I really love these little dynamic balance cushions or balance pads. These ones particularly fit the contour of low backs very well. So obviously if you're getting on and off these, make sure that there's no reason why you shouldn't be in terms of any low back discomfort. But the end of the cushion goes level with the tailbone, and there it really fits snugly into that natural contour of the spine. From here, any exercise is immediately made more difficult. Remember that if your low back moves, your pelvis must be moving as well, and vice versa. So as I move my knee out to the side, if I feel that cushion move, not only do I essentially roll off the side, but I get that instant feedback as to whether I've lost control. So breathing out as you move away, breathing in as you come back, and I can feel those core muscles have really had to wake up to stop that cushion being moved by any lack of control through my low back and pelvis. With all of the variations, particularly this one, but with any variation, if you remove your elbows and arms from the floor and you take that rotational support out, I can really feel a good step up in the amount of activation of particularly that transversus abdominis, but those deep rotational stabilizers through the base of the spine as well. So the hip twist is one of my favorite exercises to do. There's very little risk involved because of the easy nature of the setup. But that said, make sure that when you're at the furthest reaches of your movement, that you don't feel any jarring or pulling in the base of your spine if you've had that happen before. If you are at a higher end of exercise and you don't have that affliction of low back pain or hip complaints or pathologies, then particularly if you're using something with instability at the center of the modification, like this balance cushion, really be strict on yourself and don't allow any of that movement, and the hip twist can be a really great exercise. And feel free to get creative. I mean, you can combine things. You can have balance cushions under your back, things balanced on your knee. You can have all sorts of fun with this exercise and get some really invaluable rotational core strength work where there's very little hiding place. You can't use your brute muscles here, your power muscles, to mask any deficits. It's all exploited really quickly, which is why I love this exercise. And it's often a kind of great leveler. And it keeps you in check a little bit, the hip twist, because just when you think you're getting strong, you drop in back to this exercise, you suddenly think, oh, blimey, there's actually quite a lot of work to do here. And with these modifications, there should be something for everyone. So have fun with this exercise. It's a really good one. And I'll do a video with other levels beyond this in the future.